Hello and welcome to the Grim Tutors, your one-stop shop for all things Magic the Gathering. I'm Colton, also known as Pez.
And I'm Oblivion. So, what are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about zones in Magic the Gathering.
Zones. So, like, different places where different things go?
Yeah.
Well, that sounds exciting.
You're exciting.
So, there's normally 7 zones. Your library, your hand, your battlefield, your graveyard, the stack, your exile, and, in games of Commander, the command zone. Zones are different places where objects in Magic the Gathering can be placed or may be currently hanging out. So let's deep dive into each zone.
So first up, the number 1 zone is your library. Your library is your deck of cards that you're playing with. What format you're playing determines how many cards are in your library. Your library can either be on the left side or the right side, whichever side you're comfortable with. Your library is where you draw your cards from and all that, where you get your resources, all that fun stuff.
So if a card were to say that you can search your library, it means that you can look through your deck of cards for whatever it is that you're allowed to search for. Then we have your hand. Your hand is your set of cards that you have drawn at the start of the game and the cards that you have in your hand throughout the course of the game.
How many cards do you start the game with?
Normally you start with 7, but if you chose to take a mulligan and reduce your hand size to increase the
playability of your hand kind of thing?
Yeah. Then your starting hand size could be lower, but you can only have 7 cards in your hand at a time unless you have some sort of permanent or ability that states that you do not have a hand size, or you can have as many cards in your hand as you would like. So if you end your turn and you have more than 7 cards in your hand, you do have to discard at the end of your turn to get back down to the hand size of 7, unless you get to have as many cards as you want.
Next up, we have the battlefields. The battlefield is where your permanents go. So your mana will go there, your creatures, your enchantments, your artifacts, all permanent cards will go to your battlefield.
A lot of the cards that you're going to see, they're not going to say your battlefield. It might say enters the battlefield under your control, or permanents you control, permanents you own, things like that. So that's going to be in reference to your battlefield.
You could also have permanents that say it enters the battlefield under an opponent's control.
So it's still entering the battlefield, it's just not going to be on your battlefield because it's not entering under your control. Like take Copy Artifact, for example. Copy Artifact can come in as a copy of any artifact on the battlefield, meaning that it could copy an artifact on someone else's battlefield.
Next up, we have the graveyard. The graveyard is where your cards go when they are discarded, when they are milled, when your creatures die or your enchantments get blown up, or you cast a spell like an instant or sorcery, it'll go to your graveyard after it resolves.
So in a lot of card games, you'll have like a discard pile. That's kind of what your graveyard is, but it's also truly where your creatures go to die. Then we have the stack. The stack is a zone that is shared between you and your opponents, because as spells are cast and abilities are triggered and placed onto the stack, they all go together. So it's not like there's one separate stack for everybody, it's all together.
And the stack is resolved in the order of first in, last out.
Luckily, while the stack is a complicated zone, soon and very soon we will be sharing with you a wonderful deep dive about the stack with a very special guest.
I'm very excited for that video.
Me too.
Our special guest is very handsome.
Can confirm. Then we have Exile. Exile is a zone that is kind of like...
I'd say it's kind of like the graveyard, right? You can interact with it.
But not really.
But not really.
Right. So if I destroyed your creature, it would go to the graveyard. But if I exiled your creature, it goes to a far, far away place.
Called the Exile Zone.
And unless you have some sort of something to help you interact with your exile, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to be able to interact with it at all.
I think there's like one card that really interacts with exile. It's like Pull from Eternity.
I think, yeah. And there are some cards that tell you that you will exile cards or search for something and put it into exile, and then you can
cast that card until the end of your next turn, or
right.
until the end of your turn, what have you.
Magic the Gathering Purgatory. It's not alive on your battlefield, and it's not dead in the graveyard. It's just kind of ceasing to exist in a liminal space known as the Exile Zone. This is also why it's especially important when we were talking about replacement effects and things like that, because if you don't have a graveyard and everything instead goes to exile, your likelihood for being able to interact with it is very slim.
The last and final zone we have is the Command Zone in the Commander format. Command Zone is the place where your deck's commander goes. You can utilize it throughout your game.
So your game of Commander, your commander will start in the Command Zone. You cast it from the Command Zone. And then there's different rules if it died and had to come back and things like that. Kind of niche things that we'll talk about when we teach you how to play Commander, but just know that the Command Zone is where your commander is at the start of your game, unless you shuffled it into your library.
On accident.
Which happens.
It does.
A lot.
It's technically a rule in Commander that your commander has to be in a different colored sleeve.
I didn't know it was a rule. I thought it was just like a politeness thing. It can be in a different color sleeve and you'll still shuffle it into your library.
Oh, absolutely, but you can find it a lot easier.
Yes, you can. We love a good, quick episode, but it is very helpful to know what your battlefield, what your play space is going to look like.
Absolutely.
You can find us on social media at Grim Tutors MTG, and you can also find us on Patreon at patreon.com/thegrimtutors.
Links in the description below.
That's all for this time.
Please leave a comment, share the video. It helps us out a lot.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye. The Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone, like the show?
Yes.
Oh.
What's your favorite episode?
The one where the guy I think he wants to be young, something about a beach, and he like goes in a machine and goes to the beach young.
One of my favorites was, I don't remember it fully. It's been a really long time since I've seen Twilight Zone, but it's like a guy in a town, and then all of the people like turn out to not be real, and he just imagined all of this stuff.
Are we a Twilight Zone podcast? Is that what we're talking about today?
I think we're talking about Twilight Sparkle.
That's a pony, right?
Yeah, My Little Pony.
I feel like we're hitting the edge of niche nerd culture to a realm I don't want to go to.
God damn.
Ow, Tangerine.